my experience, particularly when it comes to focus in a writing consultation, one of the largest parallels I saw with the practice of mindfulness meditation and actually tutoring was the idea of attentional anchoring. So in meditation, you return your mind to the central anchor, whatever it is. It could be a sound or a phenomenon like your feet on the floor, whatever you're returning your focus back to when you notice your mind wandering. So by training that through meditation practices, it sort of gave me a practical way to practice that, which is a skill that's beneficial in tutoring consultations as well. So I would think of it in a couple of different ways. I could think of the client or the tutee as the attentional anchor. So if my mind was wandering in a session, I was starting to have other thoughts unrelated to what we were working on, I would kind of focus back in on either the student's breathing or the student's talking so I wouldn't get distracted. So just as one way of making sure I remained attentive, it was very helpful. But also when it comes to prioritizing and focusing on the paper itself, either if you think of the text as the attentional anchor, you can keep returning back to that if there were outside distractions like conversation, or if you're working in a busy library, that sort of thing. You can always return to the text. But specifically, you could return to a particular higher order concern as your attentional anchor. So if you noticed maybe the student needed particular help with organization or thesis development, rather than getting bogged down with other kinds of occurrences that'll naturally come up. So maybe you notice grammatical errors or that kind of thing. You will be able to return your mind to that higher order concern and not get bogged down so much with other distractions. So that was one of the biggest parallels I noticed.
So for me too, mindfulness meditation helped me improve mental focus in sessions because it helped me prioritize and use my session time efficiently. Because I think personally, I consider myself a strong editor. And so when I first became a tutor, it was very easy to notice the grammar mistakes and want to focus on that. But, of course, there are a lot of times more important issues that you sometimes have to ignore those smaller things to focus on them. And so I found that mindfulness meditation was a sort of practice, a rehearsal for how to deal with distractions, because when you're meditating, you're focusing on your attentional anchor, and when a distraction comes, whether that's a thought or a sound from the outside world, you have to sort of say, okay, I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to come back to my attentional anchor. And so similarly, when you find yourself in a session and you see something that distracts you, it's almost like you've practiced what you're going to do, and it's easier to say, I'm putting that aside. I'm going to come back to this main idea. And it, in a sense, it's sort of like delaying that immediate gratification of, I'm going to do this grammar fix, and allows you to focus on the issue that's more important, whether that be the thesis or the organization, something that is much more central to making a better paper for the writer. And I think, so I also have an interesting experience because I was a high school writing tutor, and we did learn you're supposed to focus on the big issues, but I probably, never did. I was always very focused on, let me fix the grammar issues. I can make their thesis better by making it a good sentence. And so I think that the difference as an undergraduate tutor was the mindfulness meditation, that it prepared me to be okay with passing up on grammar issues, even to be okay with never coming back to it, because in the end I would know that, okay, I didn't correct every typo, every verb tense issue, but instead we spent our time on something that was more important. And I think this is particularly important with ELLs because, of course, they come to you and they tend to have a lot of grammar issues where that is sometimes so distracting that you maybe can't even find the meaning in their paper. And so I think that it's a really important skill to be able to say, I have to try to see past these grammar issues and see what they're actually saying. Because in the end, it can also be helpful to them, because if you're pointing out every issue, they don't know how to fix that on their own. But if after you've read half the paper, you start saying, I'm seeing a lot of conjugation issues, and they always say I with the plural conjugation, you then realize this is a pattern, and I can help them because it's a pattern. I can now say, you need to look for eyes and make sure that you've conjugated it correctly. So I think that in a way, particularly with ELLs, passing up on those grammar issues can help you manage your time even better, because you can help them come away with a tool that they can use because you have identified this pattern for them. So yeah, I think that the meditation really set me up to be able to better prioritize the session, because I was able to not fall into the trap of fixing every error as it came.
So as for stress reduction or stress management in writing consultations, I noticed that, especially as a beginning tutor, and for many beginning tutors that I've talked to, the act of tutoring itself can be very stressful. And for many writers in the writing center that are coming for consultations, whether it's writing anxiety or deadlines or anything else, these students can tend to be particularly stressed out as well, especially students that are the ones that will go to the writing center, because these tend to be, not always, but they tend to be particularly invested students that are managing a complicated schedule, and they want to take advantage of as many resources as they can on campus. So students like this tend to already have a lot of stresses. So one of the nice things about mindfulness meditation as a tutoring practice is that it helps someone take a mental inventory of their own moods and stresses, because they, again, have a practiced method that they're used to for introspection and thinking about their own thoughts and feelings. So it's particularly useful for letting a tutor not take on any of the tutee's stresses, because if a student comes in and they have a very high stressful energy, there's a risk that might brush off on the tutor, who themselves are invested students and probably working on a lot of projects as well. So the kind of nightmare scenario would be two stressed out people trying to rush their way through a session. But by having something to return to and a trained method of calming one's mind and returning back to a focus point, oftentimes tutors can use this as a method to avoid those stresses in a consultation.
So for me, the most important takeaway of mindfulness training was the ability or the development of my metacognitive awareness. And by that I mean the ability to recognize what I was thinking and how I was thinking. Because when you're meditating, all that you have to listen to is your mind and your thoughts. So you really begin to pay attention to that voice. And I think this is really important in tutoring, because when a new person joins the writing center as a tutor, they oftentimes don't know what to look for in a paper. They don't know, is this bad? Should I talk about this? And so what I always have told the students that I've mentored as new tutors is that they really have to start paying attention to their inner voice. And I think this is hard for students because so often we are assigned readings that we find boring or difficult or confusing. And so you kind of tune that out. You know, you say, I have to read it, so I'm going to read it, and it doesn't matter what I think about it. And so you almost forget to listen to what you think and your own opinion. So sometimes the same thing happens when you're reading a paper. You say, I don't understand what's going on. And you say, oh, well, that's on me. And while sometimes maybe it is, maybe you haven't been paying the best attention, I think it can be a really good stepping stone for a tutor to figure out what to talk about. Because if they don't understand something, sometimes that's the best clue that the paper is unclear. Or if they don't know why you are now talking about this subject, the tutor should recognize that maybe as a moment to think about the organization or how the topic was introduced. Maybe it needs a better transition. So I think that mindfulness meditation is a really good way to practice that metacognitive awareness and the paying attention to one's thoughts, because we so often forget to do that. And I think that the sitting through a meditation session is one of the best ways to practice that ability, to tune into that voice, to listen to what you're thinking, and not to push it away.
For many, as far as patient and attentive listening skills are concerned, sitting alone or sitting in silence can be another source of anxiety or stress for a lot of people, especially those that are very plugged in, so used to being on social media or on their phone as often as possible. Having to kind of sit with oneself can be another difficult skill to train. So another way that mindfulness meditation practices benefit tutors is that they can work on their patience and their active and attentive listening skills. So this can be particularly beneficial in writing consultations because of the importance of wait time and the importance of personalizing a consultation to meet the needs of that client or that tutee. So if you're able to collect yourself and return your focus back to the student that you're working with, even during times of silence when they're thinking or processing information, that's going to help the sessions run more smoothly, because the goal of tutoring, as much of the foundational literature tells us, is not to be completely directive and give answers or give prescriptive solutions to writing problems, but to let the students and the clients think through their writing process and generate ideas along with you. So you can dodge this kind of compulsion of, oh, I need to edit, oh, I need to say something to the student, by returning your focus back even in moments of silent reflection. That way the student can process information before you all move on. Similarly, you can be able to pick up on subtle cues in a student's language, the types of things they say, or their emotion and mood, if you're returning your focus back to them and avoiding other distractions. That can be particularly important because you can avoid the one-size-fits-all session, or avoid running a script of how a writing consultation goes, because you're actually listening to this client and you can make decisions based on the new needs emerging in the session. So it also helps with that reflexivity and flexibility in a writing consultation. As another note, just as far as general interpersonal relationships, I also noticed an improvement in my patience and active listening with friends and colleagues and others, that kind of helped with relationship satisfaction and making sure people felt heard. So even outside of a writing consultation, there's benefit to mindfulness practices in your everyday communicative life. Another sort of direct parallel from mindfulness practice to something you can use in tutoring is this idea of empathy. And a lot of it ties into this attentive, personalized listening. So if you're truly returning your focus to the person that you're talking to, and you're reading, their facial expression or the way they say certain things, you'll be able to pick up and connect to sort of their emotions and moods, and be able to understand that in reference to your own. So kind of being able to put yourself in this person's shoes and understand. Empathy is particularly important for writing tutors because, unlike teaching, there's not necessarily a power dynamic. It's supposed to be a peer tutoring situation. So being able to identify and empathize with students who might be stressed out or might have different circumstances from the tutor is an important function of this practice. So you can pick up on if students are uncomfortable maybe talking about a certain writing topic, or if they're particularly stressed out, and you can adapt the consultation to meet those needs on the fly. Additionally, this idea of empathy sort of helps with judgments that can derail writing consultations, particularly these other directed judgments that many tutors have to work hard to avoid. For instance, a common example we've talked about is the idea that if a tutor is working with a client who's wearing a fraternity shirt and the work, the paper is about to be due the next day and the client's all stressed out, a tutor might think, oh, well, obviously, rushing or partying took advantage over this paper that you were supposed to be working on. And that might change the way that the tutor interacts with the client, which is also rushing to a generalization that might not be accurate. So being able to kind of avoid that mental noise and focus back on the actual goals of this consultation is another practical method of using this attentional anchoring idea. Similarly, you can avoid self-directed anxiety or judgments as well. For instance, you could be thinking, what, like, why am I a bad tutor for not being able to pay attention right now, or for drifting my thoughts off? So similarly in meditation, you're supposed to have a lack of judgment towards your own wandering mind. So when your mind wanders when you're meditating, instead of punishing yourself for, oh, like, why can't I focus for a second? You're supposed to try and return as calmly and non-judgmentally back to your attentional anchor. So you can do the same thing with these types of judgment-based distractions that your mind might have.